Coming up next on today's Locked On Bucks, we preview Monday's Media Day. You know what that means. The season just around the corner. Media Day is here. Training camp one day later. So we get into what are the things we hope to hear, the biggest questions you want answered on Monday. Up next here on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined as always by Camille Davis. And we thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen every day, free and available wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on YouTube as well, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Bucks is brought to you by FanDuel. You can get the season started with a big return on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. As I mentioned, Camille, the season is essentially here now.
Yes,
We only have a couple of days to wait for Media Day. We are recording this one live on Friday morning of the 27th of September. And we have some thoughts about what we hope to hear, but we also wanted to open it up to the audience that's here with us this morning of, what are you most looking forward to if you're going to be following the Bucks live stream Monday morning? By the way, it's an 8:30 start time for Media Day on Monday. So you're following along. What do you hope to get answered from an individual player, from the coaching staff, etc.? I'll get the ball rolling here and get started, Camille, with one of the things that I am very much anticipating, and that is when we hear from Doc Rivers. So number one, as we mentioned the other day, is he's still going to have the goatee, but also
I think so, Justin. I saw he was at Marquette talking, and he still had the goatee.
He was there yesterday for something we'll get to a little bit later in the show as well. But no, more importantly, the coaching staff, and just hearing Doc Rivers' thoughts on that, how he put it together, how it came to this. And I think when you mentioned the coaching staff and hearing from Doc, the natural progression is we're all looking forward to hearing from Darvin Ham on Monday.
Oh, yeah, the great return for Coach Ham. Looking forward to that for sure. And one thing about Doc Rivers is always going to give some sound bites as well. So just for that piece of it alone, the transparency that Doc tends to have when he speaks, I'm very much looking forward to hearing that as well. Want to hear a bit about what his summer plan was for some of the guys on the team. And if he even reveals any information about what guys' roles are. Like I remember that one year when I think it was Kidd, when he was saying like, oh yeah, we're going to take Greg Monroe off the bench. And Greg Monroe was like, wait, that's news to me. Like I just learned that today with all of y'all. So I don't think we'll get anything that shocking or like just whoa. But I am interested in hearing if Doc Rivers does talk anything about the rotation that he sees heading into training camp and things that he's looking for from some of the guys on the team.
Well, I mean, that was the other one that I had too. The other big takeaway and question I was hoping to get answered was what you just mentioned. And, some of those individual conversations with players, role discussion, the player's role is that was one of the big things that we heard on both sides last year under Adrian Griffin. And when Doc Rivers took over as well, that you heard some players come forward and say, we had the conversation immediately with Doc of, I want you to do this. Don't do this. So a lot of clarity, and with more time to see these guys and put together an off-season plan, I would assume even more clarity for those young players and role players specifically. So when you talk about players like Bobby Portis, players like Pat Connaughton, and especially the young guys of Chris Livingston, obviously, Andre Jackson Jr., and, MarJon can get lost in the shuffle, but MarJon as well, hearing what basically their homework assignment has been and what their expectations are from themselves and what the coaching staff expects to see them. I mean, there's no negativity that comes out on Media Day unless you're one of those teams. And, knock on wood, unless you're one of those teams like the Clippers where you just learn, oh, our star is not going to be ready or recovering from surgery. I think there is that question. We haven't addressed it yet, but I'm sure that's near the top of a lot of Bucks fans' lists as well. Is Chris Middleton going to be good to go at the start of the season?
Yeah, definitely. You always want to hear injury updates. Chris Middleton and Andre Jackson Jr. as well, who sustained an injury during Summer League. Definitely want to hear a bit about how they're doing and if they're expected to be ready as training camp kicks off next week as well. And another Doc Rivers question that I'm interested in hearing about is just if he divulges any information around scheme and how he envisions the way that this team plays. Because we've mentioned on the pod over the summer after the exit interviews that Doc Rivers had, when he mentioned like we need to get more athletic. We want to be more athletic and we have to do things around that. I'm curious to hear what he thinks about this summer and if they have more athletes on their roster and how he plans to utilize them, as well as the things that we heard over the summer about the Bucks looking to play a bit more versatile defense. And what would that look like for this team? I mean, we've talked about how defense has been a tenet of Bucks teams over the years during the Bud years and how last year that kind of fell by the wayside a bit. But Doc Rivers coming in and saying like, we have to get the defense. Just hearing if he has goals set for the defense and what that might look like schematically for the team. I don't know how in depth he'll go. You don't want to give away too much of the recipe or too much of the sauce, but I am curious to hear what he'll say around that at all on media day on Monday.
Yeah, I mean, it might be best to say nothing because we heard from Adrian Griffin the way that they were going to play. And I think, we heard it as introductory press conference, but we heard more of it at media day last year too. And, I think that led to the first kind of eyebrow raise of, you sure about this? Like how is this roster specifically with no Drew Holiday going to do this? But to that point, yeah, I am curious to hear from Doc of the athleticism on this team and, defensively, what do you need to do differently? What did you learn from last year in your small sample size that works and what really needs to be adjusted? Do you have enough personnel to do that? I think it's fair to say they are more athletic and they have more athletes, but the bigger question is it enough compared to what's out there across the league? But yeah, we also kind of buried the lead there. That's, I would assume, number one for Bucks fans is, I'm just going to get this out of the way. We have no reason to believe he won't be, but just give me the confirmation that Chris Middleton is ready to go for the start of the season. And I think the natural progression from there too is, what about back-to-backs? Are we going to see the same handling as we did a year ago?
Yeah, that's a great question to have because that's what we've gotten used to with Chris Middleton over the last few years. So I think the injury questions and hearing it from the players as well, because sometimes the players' reactions or what they reveal can be really interesting as well. So looking forward to hearing Chris talk about what the procedure was like for him, what the summer was like for him as well, because I do think about last year's media day when Griff was talking about the defense and everything like that. What stands out to me was when Brook Lopez was speaking about the defense and he just kind of chuckled like, well, yeah, we'll kind of see how this works for me. And that always stood out to me of just being like, well, he didn't, he wasn't over exaggerated about it. He just kind of was like, we'll see how that looks for me. And as we saw, it didn't look great for him in that scheme initially before the players went back to Adrian Griffin and said like, hey, we got to keep Brook closer to the hoop. So I am interested in hearing what the players have to respond to, as well as what we hear from Doc and from ownership on Monday. There's a lot of questions that I do have like around the players as well.
Yeah, some more of those questions that we'll get to coming up next on the show. Also, some updates that we got yesterday in another press conference with the introduction of the newest owner of the Bucks. We got a little more clarity on that, so we'll touch on that as well. Coming up next here on Locked On Bucks. Time to talk to you about our friends over at FanDuel. As all the NFL fans know, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. They are America's #1 sports book. So when you get the hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats. You can view live play-by-play and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. Best of all, you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's right. A $5 bet will net you $200 in bonus bets on your first wager there. It's FanDuel.com. Head over to FanDuel.com to get started. And we thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen of the day. For your second listen, we encourage you to check out the Locked On NBA podcast. There is no offseason in the NBA, and Locked On NBA provides daily basketball analysis from national and local experts in 30 minutes or less. No one keeps you as informed and entertained as Locked On NBA. Available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Camille, you mentioned you have specific questions pertaining to some of the players. I guess where would you start there? Who is the guy that you have the most pressing question for that you hope gets answered on Monday?
I mean, you want to hear, of course, from the big guys. You want to hear from Dame. You want to hear from Giannis. And the Dame one is so interesting to me because I think today is the 1-year anniversary of the Dame trade in itself. And I was looking back to last year's media day and just the vibe around the team and how they were feeling about it. And I remember Dame was talking about the Dame Giannis pick and roll. And he was just like, man, I don't know how you handle it. I think it's going to be something like teams are going to have to really try to figure out. And then when the season started, both Dame and Giannis were surprised at the way that they were being covered in that pick and roll. And on top of that, too, with Doc coming in, like the whole conversation around the Dame and Giannis chemistry, the Dame and Giannis pick and roll, how they're utilizing each other has become front stage for the two of them. And Dame has been somebody with the media who's very forthcoming. He's going to tell you exactly how he feels about it. So I am really interested in just hearing from Dame as well about how their chemistry has developed a bit more over the summer. What changes does he expect to see going into this season after having the first year with Giannis and their chemistry? So I'm really looking forward to hearing a bit more about the two of them and just how they've been working this offseason, actions, if they get into that, and what they're looking forward to this upcoming season with a year of play together under their belt.
Yeah, we could have done a show on itself of the 1-year anniversary of this trade and, the ups and downs. And Jim Ozarski of the Journal Sentinel has that retrospective basically with here's the bullet points you need to know from last year about Damian Lillard. But yeah, I'm just curious some of the things that you touched on too. And we heard from Dame towards the end of at the end of the season after that Game 6 loss to the Pacers about things that they were going to work on, and specifically he and Giannis getting that time together. We don't need to question what Dame has worked on. We've seen it if you're on social media. But yeah, I think that's the other question that kind of ties into all of this that I'm sure a lot of Bucks fans have is how much time did you spend with Giannis? Like where did you guys work on these things? Did you work out together, X, Y, and Z? I'm led to believe the answer to that is yes, but some more clarity there. And, I think that's up there with number one is Giannis and Dame's time together in the offseason. The Chris Middleton component is up there as well. But, when you mentioned versatility earlier and do you have enough athletes and the way that Doc Rivers wanted to play, I think that's kind of the third question I have is this going to be a defense that has multiple looks, basically, with that versatility? In other words, when you have your matchups with Philly and Denver and teams that have more of your traditional bigs, there is a place for Brook Lopez, and we're really going to utilize him here. But when you're playing some other teams that are going to get out and run, the Indiana Pacers, we saw what they did to him. And you can think about Miles Turner, but we've seen Miles Turner take less and less of a role in that offense and team overall through the years here.
Yeah.
And even, I think the fact that he has not been extended kind of speaks to that too, that they've locked up other players. I don't know about the fit there, that I do wonder, okay, we're not saying move on from Brook Lopez and you don't need him. I think we've been two pretty staunch supporters of that, the opposite of it. But do you envision a way where part of how we're going to preserve Brook too is in some of those matchups, we're not going to try to force a square peg in a round hole. Right. It's going to be, well, Brook's playing 18, 20 minutes, something like that. And that's a way to kind of buy him some rest while getting some looks at some other versatile options we hope to go to.
Yeah. So you bring up the Pacers definitely sparked another question that I was thinking of, because you tend to learn a lot by how you left last season. So what was the exit? And we know the Bucks exit came at the hands of the Pacers. And I do wonder if any of the players will discuss lessons learned from that playoff loss against the Pacers, in the sense of like, did it change anything about the way they approached the offseason? Because I remember after the Bucks lost to Boston in the 2022 media day, Bobby Portis was somebody in particular when he came back in there and he was talking about that Celtics playoff loss, how it fueled him throughout the summer, and saying like, I needed that series to take the next step for my career, and I worked a lot. And when he was asked like, hey, when teams try to run you off the 3-point line, he just cut it off like, no, I'm going to be ready for that. Like, I worked on that. I do wonder if the players took anything from that Pacers series and applied it to their offseason work plan of what they were trying to improve on, based on playing a team like the Pacers that run the court the way that they do, understanding that you might see some more teams looking to push the pace against y'all this season.
It's a good point on what we heard from Bobby. And, I think the one player we have really heard an answer about that question that you raised is Dame. And he's talked about it, whether or not it's been openly or just comments and posts that he's put out there about hearing everything and ready to prove everyone wrong. But I mean, yes, and it's not just that series, but it's all the chatter. I think all of it kind of wraps into one. The danger of it is, look, you can kind of use that once, but we need to see the results. Like, you can't become the boy who cries wolf. I mean, we heard the same thing from Giannis last year about he heard all the haters after that loss to the Miami Heat, and he's coming back stronger than ever. He did, right? We talked about the numbers. It's not a one-man game here. But I think it's just the whole picture of, you were run off the court by the Pacers. I mean, you showed grit and heart to take some of those games that you did and nearly take game 3. But it didn't go how you envisioned. We could see it kind of lining up towards that. The injuries are a big part of it, but it's not just injuries, right? It takes some introspection to look at, here's how we were playing. Here's some of the things we were doing. This doesn't work. We can't do this. So I think it's 2 years in a row you fell short of your goal. And just looking around the Eastern Conference, as you and I said, at least one of those teams, when we're looking at the top 6 that we perceive, at least one is going to take a step backward and disappoint. It's just the way things work. So how do you make sure you're not that team? Because I think the vast majority of basketball, quote unquote, experts and fans think you're going to be that team. So there should be a lot of fuel to drive you. But again, at this level, you shouldn't need that to drive you.
Yeah, just little extras, a little extra on top of what you already have cooking up when it comes to like that motivation factor. I think it helps for a lot of people when you just have that, like, people saying, I can't do this. Like, one day I'll tell the story of like the worst date I ever went on, which ended with me doing something like trying to walk home from Mayfair Mall because he said I couldn't. It's a long story, Justin. I'll get into another time, but it fueled me to try to prove that man wrong. But another question that I do have player wise is directly for Giannis, and just how is he going to feel playing without the Nasses for the first time in like 5 years? Like, he's been a focal point of the Bucks bench since his signing here in 2019. So just, that human element side of it, like what is it going to be like to not have your brother on the sideline with you for the first time in about 5 years?
I'm still waiting for like some grand announcement at media day, kind of like way back when Triple H kicked out Shawn Michaels and brought in X-Pac from WCW, that all of a sudden Doc Rivers just has we have one more announcement to the coaching staff, and the Nasses comes out. But yeah, I mean, that is the other interesting part for Giannis too, is we've talked about the support system that he's had for his entire time, save for that first year here in Milwaukee. But he's always had his family with him, living with him, on the team, around him. And it's going to be a little different this year. I got some thoughts on the young players and some updates. I don't want to give away too much that we may have on next week's show, but I mentioned there was more. Like, there's been a lot from the Bucks this week. They had their partnership with, I I can't remember the pronunciation, so I'm not going to say it and screw it up, but they had their partnership that they announced earlier this week. They had a press conference yesterday for the ownership announcement. They have their golf outing today, this afternoon, as you listen to this on Friday, and of course, media day on Monday. So it's a busy stretch for the Bucks, but we learned some things from that ownership press conference yesterday. We'll dig into that coming up next on Locked On Bucks. Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Here's why. All you do is pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. And right now with Prize Picks, you can win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. And if you want to play alongside some big names like Drewski, Joe Budden, MMA champ Sugar Shane O'Malley, you can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. So download the Prize Picks app today and use the code LOCKEDONNBA. You'll get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONNBA on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. So, Camille, I mentioned we had the press conference yesterday where the Bucks introduced Junior Bridgeman as the newest owner, and we kind of kicked around some questions when that news started to break that you and I had about that. We got some of those answered yesterday. The timeline of events, it sounds like this really picked up steam fall last year. The way that Jimmy Haslam was saying it, that he and Junior Bridgeman were together at a Browns game, and they had some mutual friends in the Louisville area that kind of introduced them. Junior Bridgeman sharing some more of his story too about things that he's done along the way and rattling off all the boards he's a member of out there, which was very impressive. But talking about, the big thing, or one of the biggest things, what the community means to him. This is where he got his start in business with the Wendy's franchises. It's where his children were born. I think he said they still reside here as well. But what he's done in the league the last handful of years, and even then when he got started, of going around speaking to rookies at the symposium of like, here's how you don't go broke. Here's how you have to, look out for your money. Here's some business ventures that you can look for. And here's how you can really grow your portfolio and your wealth. And said, I kept feeling like I would go to those things and I would talk to these players and try to teach them about life after basketball, but they still didn't really know what life in basketball was like. So it kind of fell on deaf ears. So that's one of the things I'm really looking forward to now as the owner. Is I want to meet with these players, or an owner. I want to meet with these players and I want to help them out and kind of share some of my learnings with them.
Yeah, and the way that he approaches giving out that information, I love people like that who don't gatekeep the sauce to their success, where Junior Bridgman is somebody who has been very open about trying to help players. And he mentioned himself, like, if anything, I like to highlight what pitfalls might be in front of them more than anything else, because that's what you really need to watch for. So I was happy to see that press conference yesterday, because it did answer a few questions heading into media day that I had about Junior Bridgman joining the ownership group for the Bucks, such as like what stake or what shares in the team did he buy, and seeing that it was a few different minority owners who kind of cobbled together their shares, added up to that 10%, and then he takes that and becomes, a significant minority owner of the team. It's a really cool story. And also hearing from ownership, so I believe we haven't necessarily heard from ownership since the coaching switch as well. Like we heard from John Horst, but being able to hear from the coaching staff, because this will be the ownership, because this is the second year in the row where there has been coaching, turnover for the Milwaukee Bucks. So just hearing about how they feel about Doc, the decision making, so on and so forth. And I'm also interested in hearing what ownership and John Horst we'll say about the new CBA, since we're a year into it now with a little bit more information, a little bit more understanding on how it's going to work. Because last year, like Wes Edens was just talking about like, it's trying to get competitive balance and we're one of the highest spending teams and it impacts us. But like, I'm here for competition. And I wonder again, after this summer, which we talked about the very few financial tools the Bucks had to improve their roster, how they feel about how the CBA is dictating team building and just what they see going forward for the Bucks.
And yeah, I mean, it was interesting too. I don't know if it was scheduling related or what. It's one of the questions that I hope to get answered in the next couple of days. But it sure seemed like Jimmy Haslam's the governor based on that and some of the other interactions that we've seen. And I could have sworn when that portion of the ownership change took place, I thought the assumption, or we were told, was that Wes Edens was still the governor for a couple years before that switch would take place. But yeah, he mentioned, so the NBA has a cap on how many owners you can have. And I know the Bucks have been very close to that threshold for a while now. I mean, remember Aaron Rodgers was in that group at one point. So yeah, according to Jimmy Haslam, a handful of those minority owners that own, less than 1% stake basically said, we're ready to cash out. So they cobbled together that, and we didn't get a clear answer on whether or not there were other adjustments to the pie, basically, and how big the slices were for the main owners in Jimmy Haslam, Wes Edens, Jamie Dinan, and Michael Fascitelli. But I don't think we got this at the press conference yesterday. I think it's been reported by the Journal Sentinel and others that it's 10% that Junior Bridgeman owns in this team, which, again, you and I talked about this last week when this news started to break. Well, if the valuation, what was it, $4 billion that it was pushed up to, or a little bit more than that, 10% of that, when you think about what Junior Bridgeman is putting in for a guy that didn't play in an era with the money, and the money that he's made outside of it is certainly impressive. So it was just interesting to see the group together, hear some of those thoughts, and from Junior Bridgeman as well. I think now we're all curious to see, okay, he's got a lot going on with all the other ventures he has. How frequently are we going to see Junior Bridgeman around the team and at the arena and at games? That's one of the other big questions they have go forward.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I found it interesting when Junior Bridgeman mentioned like he was in talks with Herb Cole a while ago as well. Like maybe I'll buy the team, but the timing wasn't right. And he mentioned like, I do kind of wish maybe I was 20 years younger getting into the ownership group of the Milwaukee Bucks, but like I'm here now and I'm looking forward to it. So I do wonder how often we'll see him. I always love just being able to connect different eras of Bucks basketball. It's just something about that's always really cool. But I mean, we spent the whole episode really going over a few questions that we had for Media Day. And generally you think of Media Day and it's like, what can you really learn from a Media Day? Because it's a lot of best shape of my lives and so on and so forth. But I think what we've laid out here is that there are quite a few really interesting tidbits of information that we're looking to hear come out of Media Day this year for the Milwaukee Bucks. And listen, it's going to be an early morning, but I'm very much looking forward to it. And I'm glad that you're going to be in the building as well to be able to ask some of these questions and get some information from the team and the players and ownership.
That was just to go back really quickly to that last point that you made, and then we can pivot to Media Day a little more. Yeah, I was struck by that too when he was asked about when Herb sold the team and how he said it just wasn't the right time then. Herb Cole sold the team for $550 million. When you think about that, of what it's worth now. And Junior Bridgeman, I don't know what his net worth was then, but it's around $600 million
now.
So, I mean, with partnership, I mean, he could have done it, and you wonder how differently things would have looked if that would have happened back then. But yes, we did get some of those questions answered as it pertains to Junior Bridgeman and his stake in the team. And I'm curious if we see Junior Bridgeman at Media Day on Monday. So we'll see. But yes, Monday morning, a very early start. It's usually like around 11:10. Sometimes it's been like noon-ish that it gets started. for media day, and it used to be hours upon hours. That's been one of the welcome changes. Is there were 2 days where you knew you're there all day. It was always media day, and whenever the Bucks season would come to an end, they would basically have a here's your last chance to talk to the guys until next season day, where you'd show up to the training facility.
Mhm.
And so way back when, the Cousins Center, the last handful of years, obviously the Freighter Sports Science Center, you'd show up there and you were essentially there all day. That players would just come and go as they're kind of saying their goodbyes and getting their plans and everything else from the coaching staff. But you'd show up 10 a.m. and you're there until like 5. That's been adjusted as well, where, obviously with the COVID years, they didn't even do that, but it hasn't been quite as long. Media day was the same, where you'd show up late morning and you were there until early to mid afternoon. It was an all day affair. And this one, 8:30 started, and we've been told should be wrapped up by 11. So I won't complain. The plan for us, for you and I, is Monday's show is going to come out later. So it won't be there in the morning. We're going to do a reaction to media day and some of the things that we heard from those players and coaches. That we'll record that after it ends. So in theory, should be sometime around noon in the early afternoon that will knock out that show. But I did have a brief conversation with members from media relations for the Bucks, and just to peel behind the curtain here, I usually don't ask for anything on media day. Like most of us on the broadcast team some don't even go because they have a separate marketing day for that group. But media day is mostly for your beat writers that are putting together their stories and season previews. I don't mean this in a disparaging sense, but like your TV people and media outlets that show up 2 to 3 times a year. Like, fine, here's your opportunity to fire off questions and meet with these players. So we usually don't try to take that time away, but this year was a little different, where I was like, well, I mean, I am one of those other outlets as well with Locked On Bucks here. And I just feel like everything we've witnessed for the last couple months here, I can't not get some time with Chris Livingston. So I did have a brief conversation with their media relations staff for a couple of asks. Chris Livingston is on that list, and a few other players. So I do think we'll get something with them. And if that's the case, we'll probably put together just some bonus shows with those brief interviews with those players on throughout the course of next week. But hopefully some exclusives coming from Media Day on Monday. But I do know this, Camille, there's going to be a lot to talk about. I don't think it's going to be a boring Media Day, given all the change that we've talked about this offseason.
Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to it, and I cannot wait for Monday to see the media day for sure, and then to hear just about the exclusive content. If we can grab that with some of the players when you get a chance to talk with them, and yeah, it's exciting because it means like the season is really here. Like we did it. We got through another long off season. Longer than expected off season at that with the Bucks. And we are here. Media day is right around the corner. It is Monday. Training camp is next week. And then we have preseason basketball on like the 6th of October. Like we are on the 6th, so close to everything coming back around.
Yeah, 1 week from this Sunday. Preseason basketball. It's a 7:00 local tip in Detroit. So an 8:00 tip in Detroit, 7:00 local for us. I had to do like a triple take on that when we were starting to get ready for that. Like, wait, it's really 7? Is it 7 Eastern time? No, it's 7:00 Central time, and it's an ESPN game as well, because of course, who wouldn't want to see preseason basketball between the Bucks and the Detroit Pistons? But yeah, I mean, it's here, and you go back to the bubble year and the disappointment that was there and the loss of the Miami Heat. And I remember thinking like, man, there's no off season because the Bucks season ended right before Labor Day that year. And then you were
Memorial Day.
Labor Day.
Labor Day. Oh, yeah.
Like playoffs. Yeah. And then everything kind of started to pick up steam in November. It was like the week before Thanksgiving that was basically free agency, that you had Bobby Portis signing and the trade with Drew Holiday. And then the season started in December. So there was like no real time to catch your breath. And I remember thinking like, man, it'd be nice to get some time. Granted, we just came off of a 4-month layoff during COVID, but thinking like it'd be nice to get a little more time off. And now we've had it with 2 straight summers of being done May through October, basically, or through September. That's like, all right, I don't want this. If we can find a happy medium somewhere in the middle, I'd be perfectly fine with being off mid-June through September, go forward.
Yeah, I always hope that the Bucks are playing basketball on my birthday towards the end of May. And when the Bucks are not playing basketball around my birthday, I'm like, this was not the year that I was expecting. But as we wrap up, Justin, before we get out of here, definitely do want to make sure we just say, rest in peace to Joe Wolf. He was a Wisconsin Herd assistant coach. He had played with the Bucks for a year as well. He was also a Bucks assistant coach for a few years.
One of the greatest high school players in the history of Wisconsin, if not the greatest.
Yeah. So definitely just wanted to make sure that we didn't get out of here without just sending condolences to his friends and his family and all those who knew and loved him. It's always tough when something like this happens, especially when it's unexpected.
59 years is far too young
Mm-hmm.
for anybody to go. You mentioned that 1 year that he spent with the Bucks, his homecoming year towards the end of his career. But yeah, he was one of the greatest players at prep level in the history of this state. Was a team captain at the University of North Carolina. I mean, I remember being a kid and my uncles talking to me about Joe Wolf when I got into basketball and just how special he was, and being used to in those early days, in the very early 90s, of like the Badgers and Marquette, and knowing North Carolina was like on a different level, and hearing about this guy from Wisconsin that played at North Carolina and was the captain of the team was something that always stuck with me. So yes, our condolences to everybody, his friends and family, and everybody with the Wisconsin Herd as well, where you mentioned that he was an assistant, a homecoming of sorts for the Kohler native. So yes, very, very sad news to learn yesterday on the passing of Joe Wolf. As we wrap here, I mean, I don't want to promise anything, but I will say some of the comments that we see in players that our fans are excited for here. One of those names, I am hoping to get some time with DeLon Wright next week or on Monday at Media Day. So those are the 2 names out of the Vulch that I asked for. I will say this. I didn't ask for Giannis or Dame or Chris Middleton because, like I said, we'll clear some space and let the rest of the outlets take that. But you knew I couldn't not ask for Chris Livingston.
Had to.
And DeLon Wright was another one I hope to get some time with. There were 4 other names that I'm hoping to set something up with that I think have an interesting story for this team next year. So I think we should have that additional content for you next week as well. So again, Monday, it's going to be a little later. It's going to be after Media Day that we put out Monday's show. It's going to be a reaction to Media Day. So don't look for the latest show in your feed quite that early. Then training camp starts Tuesday. And I mean, we got to get our Bucks over unders out of the way. So we're getting together with Frank to work on a time for that, because like we said, after Media Day, 6 days later, the first preseason game for the Milwaukee Bucks, and an interesting preseason schedule as well, where they're all kind of lumped together. And then you get a week off for the regular season to get started. That'll do it for today's show. So again, a Media Day recap that we'll do Monday. We'll do that one live too, and give everybody a chance that streamed it and followed along to share their thoughts on what they learned from Media Day. So Monday afternoon, we will have our show there, and then it's going to be a sprint towards previewing this season and the preseason, which begins on Sunday. We still got to figure out post-game pods for games now. It's getting back into that conversation of, oh yeah, we got to plan on that with game's already starting here. That'll do it for today's show, though. Thanks everybody for tuning in. All the questions that we got throughout the chat today, as well. Leave your comments and thoughts in the comments of any pressing questions you have for Media Day on Monday, and we'll see if those get answered or we can help get those answered. But for Camille, I'm Justin. We will talk to you once again next week on Locked On Bucks.